Hello, dear ones, and welcome to the Great Dream. I am grateful for your presence. Today I'd like to talk about a problem that we in modern Western society all face to some degree or another: alienation. Humans are social animals. We evolved to be together in families, tribes, and villages, where everyone knows everyone else, everyone takes care of everyone else, and everyone has a place. In nature, if you're alone, without a tribe, without anyone to help you, you're probably going to die. Isolation equals death. The need for companionship is an instinct so deeply ingrained in social animals like ourselves that even with all biological needs met, it is possible to die of loneliness. But the modern world spits on our evolved heritage. Far from the state of nature, in the artificial universe created by Western modernity, many people are alienated from one another and from themselves. The result is often serious mental illness, as evidenced by the high rates of suicide among young people in America and the reports of school shootings that have gotten so common as to be nearly unnoticeable. The main culprit is the rampant loss of intimacy in human contact. Due to the mediation of all our interactions by outside, inhuman forces, such as social media, politics, and money. We are divided from one another by digital platforms, political ideologies, and market forces into ever smaller and more easily manipulated identity groups, echo chambers to be commodified, objectified, and marketed to. We are made to feel, through countless subliminal influences, as if we are mere human resources which serve the profit motives of gigantic corporations and the utopian strivings of political cults. It seems as if in order to get ahead, we have to treat others as resources in turn, thus perpetuating the cycle. This commodification is rampant in the modern world, with meaningful relationships ever more often replaced by economic interactions between what amounts to living brands. People are so often now no longer people, but symbols of the people others wish them to be. Masks over a void, alienated from themselves. Social media is one of the main drivers of this process, with its heavy emphasis on maximizing likes, shares, comments, and other such abstractions, a mirror of the capitalist commandment to maximize the bottom line. Posts on social media rarely come solely from the heart, but usually serve another subconscious goal: to receive those little dopamine hits. This leads, over time, to the construction of a false self, a personal brand defined primarily by the likes and dislikes of others. This is all exacerbated by the characteristics of the medium itself. Digitally mediated interaction can be, and often is, truly intimate and personal, but it can also be dehumanizing and fake. Because it lacks the element of physical immediacy, when it is alienating, it can be even more alienating than in-person interactions. Worse yet, most social media doesn't even provide the intimacy, which comes from being alone together. If you're in a room with a single other person talking, there's an intimacy to that, which the bulletin board style of today's social media platforms does not have. The lack of real-time interaction results in delayed feedback, which psychological studies have consistently found contributes to feelings of meaninglessness, powerlessness, and lack of context. It's like talking to a crowd, impersonal and separating. No one has the mental bandwidth to keep up with so many different individuals at the same time. So the more friends you have on social media, the less likely you are to actually know any of them. Rather, you are likely using most of them as human resources, contacts to someday use in the future for business purposes, or sources of the little hearts and thumbs to which you are unknowingly addicted. But there are cases where multi-person interaction can feel deeply intimate, connecting, and revitalizing. If you've ever been to a music concert, or a religious service, or a political rally, then you know the feeling of unity that can come from many people sharing a common activity in sync with one another. People have a tendency to resonate and synchronize with cues in their environment, from the rhythmic patterns of music to the shared body language of ritual to the rhetorical hypnosis of a leader. This immediacy of feedback lays the groundwork for emotional connection, communion, and a kind of merging of consciousness, which is notably absent from most digital communication. The problem is, identification with the group due to this instinct of synchronization can easily result in a relative loss of individual identity. When you become too united with an abstract group identity, such as a religious or political affiliation, you become alienated from yourself, and just as dangerously, from anyone who disagrees. Many unscrupulous identity groups take advantage of the alienation already rampant in society to prey on the disillusioned, promising communion, intimacy, and connection. They do provide these things, but at the cost of alienating their members from everyone else, thus exacerbating the problem they profess to solve. At worst, this process can lead to extremism and violence, and in fact, this is the core method by which tribal cultures, and modern ones, brainwash their members into being willing to dehumanize and massacre rival tribes. But in modern Western culture, the mostly suppressed instinct to physical warfare is mirrored and sublimated by the culture of economic warfare. Money is an abstraction, not only of temporal power and the resources necessary for survival, but also of social power, status, and prestige. Where once nobility was conferred by great deeds of valor or by ancestral connection to a traditional heritage, it is now conferred by ownership of pieces of paper, or more often, data on hard drives representing them. The striving to remain safe in the bosom of the tribe, which is at the heart of social media addiction and political groupthink, finds its ultimate embodiment in the lust for wealth. And as in the feudal states of old, those who have give only enough to prevent revolt to those who have not. So the masses lead lives of quiet desperation, beholden to their corporate masters, without whose pittances they could not survive, alienated from the natural human right to self-reliance and self-sufficiency. But corporations are now the ultimate haves and the new feudal lords, to which even their shareholders are beholden, as the disastrous effects of stock market crashes attest. Through the process of synchronization in the form of corporate culture, and via the threat of destitution for those who don't stay in line, corporations take on a life of their own, like ant-hives. In a sense, they exist as stigmergic emergent phenomena, independent of their individual employees, as evidenced by the fact that in some countries they are actually considered persons under the law. With an external locus of control, driven by the sole reactive urge to maximize shareholder profit above all else, these phantoms addicted to a phantom do what drug addicts always are driven to do. They desperately try to use every available resource, including other people, to get their next fix. Nearly all of the alienation in modern society can, I suspect, be ultimately traced to the fact that the most powerful forces on Earth are not people, but rather abstract, inhuman hive minds like corporations and political groups and even cults with no internal spark of life. Vampires feeding on money and belief and ultimately on human lives. All mainstream social media companies, after all, are owned by huge corporations and exist to feed them money through showing their users ads, which themselves target the identity group affiliations of their viewers in order to trigger subconscious emotional reactions. And those identity groups are ultimately manipulated by media produced, guess what? By huge corporations. Everything in society somehow serves the purpose of keeping these monstrosities fed and their servants docile. Once you realize that, the world looks a lot darker. However, there is hope. I believe that the primary reason that corporate hive minds act as they do is because of their need for external validation in the form of shareholder funding, which is the same force that produces toxic, abusive behavior in narcissists and others who live solely on external validation. They always have to put shareholder profits above all else. So anything that gets in the way, from employee wages to consumer health to the future of the entire biosphere, is ignored. until bad publicity and loss of profits due to public outrage, which itself can be managed because they own the media, force them to pay attention. But if, hypothetically, corporations were required to keep 50% or more of their shares in the hands of employees, spread as evenly as plausible across the company, then suddenly their locus of control would be internal. Like a person with self-compassion who puts their own well-being above fake validation by other people, and who thus is self-realized and self-driven, and has no need to put others down. With the members of the hive mind having the majority voice in its affairs, they could start to put their own interests and those of the customers they serve foremost in the company's collective mind, above the single-minded quest for profit, perhaps becoming more human and less sociopathic. And perhaps, as a result, since corporate interests indirectly influence or control most of society, we would then see society as a whole go the same way, with no need for bloody revolution or great transformation that inflicts as much suffering as it cures. Could it be that this one change, instituted into law, would be enough to put a big dent in the problem of alienation? I don't know, but I think it's worth considering. I'd love to know what you think about all this, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always grateful for your input. This video took me a long time to make because I've got a lot to say on this subject. Alienation is something I have a lot of experience with, and it took me a long time to organize my thoughts. So if you're interested, I will probably be making a lot more videos about this subject, going into detail on other aspects of it, so stay tuned. But until next time, my friends, thank you, and may you be blessed.